To start, plug and plays get me here. If that name doesn't ring a bell, think about a console controller and game all in one package. They were iconic for their time. They were almost like shovelware games. So imagine SpongeBob's face is the controller and his long nose is the joystick. In hindsight, it's an odd image and an even odder concept. But these strange devices would introduce me to plenty of genres and IPs that I would stick with for years to come, possibly even becoming the root cause of a lot of my nostalgic love. I had several of them and they cemented early impressions on me. SpongeBob and a Spider-Man plug and play made me love both franchises, especially for Spider-Man and its games. But uniquely, a Power Rangers game didn't cement the love of a trademarked world. Instead, a simple plug and play fostered a passion for a genre, beat 'em ups. There was something incredibly satisfying about side-scrolling action games focused on the player versus the enemy. It was like a fighting game with tight controls, but easier to pick up. It had a better entry level, and while typically difficult, it was never harder than trying to beat my older brother in a traditional fighting game. Mechanically tight action games have an easy pull. Some people contest that tight gameplay can be art with its intricacy and feedback. The issue is that most mechanical games are player versus player, which has its own different appeal. All that's to say that ever since that first introduction, I've been hooked on beat 'em ups, and the variety of character systems and niches between each game continues to pull me deeper into the genre. So it's no surprise that today's topic pulled my attention. About 6 months ago, and around 100 hours of gameplay prior, I started a game called DFO, or Dungeon Fighter Online. Dungeon Fighter Online is a free-to-play MMORPG beat-em-up that's popular worldwide. Despite being relatively unknown in the West, it is one of the top 10 grossing franchises globally. It's credited with inventing many common trends in the video game market, and invokes passion from its few loyal North American fans. So being both a fan of the MMORPG and beat-em-up genres, I wanted to give it a go, but with a twist. I'd play 100 or more hours and exclusively focus on its leveling or main story content. There's no objective approach to covering an MMO, so I decided to cover leveling, the content every player has to do to get to Endgame. On average, a good leveling experience determines whether I play an MMO or not. The best endgame doesn't justify shit early games, so I rarely get to enjoy that content. When an MMO's leveling process is fun, I typically just complete it on repeat with alts or alternate characters. Being something I'm personally familiar with, and an approach every player must tackle, it made sense to cover it. I decided on 100 hours because MMOs are massive. They're not called massive multiplayer online games for no reason. There's no way to cover everything, but if a player gets 100 hours in any game, then they should have thoughts established by that point. Furthermore, my personal rules of engagement are beat the game before you cover it, or hit the 20-hour mark and inform your audience that your experience is inconclusive. The issue there is that 20 hours in an MMO does not scratch the surface of what is offered. Many games gradually introduce the first dozen hours into their massive world. It's easy to get overwhelmed in MMORPGs, so I won't fault or impair the genre for reasonable design choices. On the surface, Dungeon Fighter Online is a genre slapped into a trend. Korean massive multiplayer online games are nothing new and are a dime a dozen. Dungeon Fighter Online originally intended to receive support for 6 months. Success wasn't anticipated. Regardless, success did come knocking, and DFO exceeded expectations and was continuously given more and more expansions and updates from its release in 2005 to the present in 2022. The main contributors, in my opinion, would be its impressive visuals, progression systems, and promise for skill expression. Being an MMO, it has a prominent social aspect that doesn't really hurt it. However, the leading hook to this game is the price tag and the contrast to its quality. In the States, DFO is free-to-play and doesn't overly abuse the free-to-play model. It's impressive because the game features professional-looking retro arcade sprites with solid animations and effects. The overall visual look of the game is epic and supports the theme of a power fantasy. It matches a solid look and feel with tight controls and various complex systems. Beyond its initial look and feel, it combines fantastical worlds across space and time in a unique fantasy world partnered with science-like magic. The number of settings is refreshing, as well as their contrast. The various empires, historical references, and anime tropes mesh to create an extremely dynamic world unique to itself. All of this works with very subtle and wild Judeo-Christian themes and parodies to make a universe worth investing in. But to see those elements mesh, I had to start somewhere. Every story has its hero and its humble beginnings. Mine began with a male slayer. He begins his massive multiplayer online role-playing game journey in Dungeon Fighter Online, mulling through the story and doing quests till he reaches the finale and all that comes after. Before our hero ever gets close to the big bad, before he ever becomes a legend, he has to grow. In an MMORPG, everyone has to level up and progress from zero to hero. This process is generally called leveling. Leveling can be defined as the process of grinding to the max level. Leveling can include low-level dungeons, raids, quests, or even PvP. Destiny 2, for example, at one point in time at least, allowed you to reach the max level through just PvP content. However, in DFO, the obvious way to level is to proceed through the main quest and story and side quests by talking to NPCs and clearing areas. You'll run around, talk to NPCs, and then clear out dungeons to get rewards. Each dungeon is full of rooms with baddies inside. You aim to wipe them all out, move from floor to floor, and face the boss at the end. It's simple, effective, and fun. While the basic formula is simple and fun, it's hard to imagine that a beat-em-up can grip people for hundreds or even thousands of hours. DFO seduces its players with tight controls, mechanically deep characters, and an overwhelming amount of systems. Compared to competitors, it trumps the competition. For me, characters and their complexity of theme are my favorite aspect of any game from any genre. Compared to most beat-em-ups, DFO has characters with the complexity and depth of fighting games which easily outclasses other beat-em-ups. And the quantity of systems and content of the MMORPG format simply outclasses most games in replayability and attraction. Solid PvP and PvE multiplayer content and dopamine-producing progression systems have a tendency to rope me in and entrap me more than any other game. My favorite part of the MMORPG format is that early progression, the leveling. Some games let you skip this process with passes, free skips, or whatever. But I love the learning curve of these games. As I become more proficient, I unlock more skills to use. As I comprehend more systems, I discover more mechanics. Leveling is an experience of learning the game. So to speak, the player and the game grow in scope together during the leveling process. In layman's term, going from zero to hero is the most compelling form of role-playing. I say all this because, while I love leveling, many games toss it aside in favor of post-game content. After leveling, you must interact with the more tedious systems to prepare your character for the most difficult challenges. Many see post-game as the best aspect of MMORPGs, the final test of both player and their character. Because of the demand for an exciting endgame, many developers have neglected leveling. However, Dungeon Fighter Online has enjoyable and accessible leveling. It's pleasant to see members of the DFO community enjoy both leveling and endgame raids. Some even argue which they prefer. It's much healthier than the typical status quo where the endgame is the only reason to play the MMO. So DFO sold itself initially with class, but kept me playing with its delightful progression. Whether you enjoy the story or not, the gameplay carries it and the player to the endgame instead of being a hurdle to the good part. Using the previous footage as a reference, I want to quickly break down what this genre is and how evolutionary DFO feels. A beat-em-up is traditionally a 2D side-scrolling player versus enemy fighting game. It's characterized by the player hitting all enemies on the screen, marching through the level, clearing rooms, and finally killing a boss to win the level. It's something you haven't heard before. Most of these have a variety of characters and levels to clear. That being said, they can lack content beyond their first few levels, and some games use a scale to supplement that issue, while other games focus on replayable elements like secrets, difficulty options, or collectibles. Most beat-em-ups lack progression systems. There may be unlocks, but it's atypical. It makes DFO that much more interesting. Being an MMORPG beat-em-up, it guarantees some novel features. It's a beat-em-up with social aspects, equipment, levels, and a wide variety of skills to invest in. The game is constantly evolving due to this platform. Aiding and group content extends cooperative play beyond the typical couch setting. Large groups of players can coordinate to tackle terrifying enemies scaled to intimidate even the larger groups. Guilds and friend systems add an extra layer to teaming up. Progression extends beyond even the most ambitious rivals. Gear is a standard of the MMO fare, and features set bonuses and unique effects that dwarf anything on the beat-em-up market. There are plenty of cosmetic options, gear, avatars, pets, titles, and so much more. Abilities can be leveled, and skill points can be distributed freely. The level of meta and customization is unrivaled and compounds an entirely customizable journey in a beat-em-up. Role-playing and social elements contribute new and valuable ideas to the genre space. I'm not saying any of this is downplaying the quality of the genre, but to magnify the importance of what makes DFO iconic. Furthermore, its MMO roots and brilliant ideas about inputs created one of my favorite control schemes on the keyboard. DFO combines fighting game direct inputs and MMORPG hotkeys to create a unique system perfect for the medium. The control scheme is accessible and has an opportunity for skill expression. There are rewards for interacting with direct inputs, but the rewards don't remove the applicability of hotkeys. For reference, the primary inputs are a movement with arrow keys, attack with X, alt attack with Z, the jump is C, and some interact in menu hotkeys. However, two formats can be used exclusively or interchangeably to cast skills. The player can assign skills to hotkeys or use a direct input or DI before attacking. A direct input involves a specific set of inputs to cast the skill. For example, using the movement controls to perform a forward quarter circle in DFO, you'd hit down arrow, right arrow followed by X to cast that skill. If that skill has a cooldown or a resource cost like mana, then using the DI will reduce the cost of that skill and its cooldown, rewarding the player. Furthermore, the player has more skills than hotbar options, which assign hotkeys to skills. So to optimize, it helps to memorize the more accessible DI skills and save the hotbar for the crazy multi-input DI skills. So DFO actively encourages players to hone their skills for little rewards like throwing out more spells and less expensive than exclusive hotkey players. To reiterate, it's well done because complete hotkey play is still viable. That being said, it's crucial to note that DFO can be a lot to take in. Whether that's your first MMO or you're a veteran, DFO can quickly swarm the player with excess content. There are many progression systems, character mechanics, and the overall difficulty to consider, but don't fret because it's not as awful as it appears. Starting out can be overwhelming, especially because many subsystems are optional. Many optional systems exist for fun or only to help out max level characters. It's best to focus on what's directly in front of you, tackle things not only as they come but as they feel relevant at the start of the game. Focus on gaining levels and using the resources provided to get stronger. Leveling provides skill points that you need to allocate to unlock and improve abilities for yourself. The player should also focus on equipping gear as it's provided to them. Don't worry about having the best equipment in the beginning. Just pick up what you can off the ground and use the best of the pick from drops and quest rewards and you'll be fine. Simply focus on improving your gear and skills while progressing, and you'll be fine. The main story and leveling experience in DFO is welcoming and fair. It demands very little from the player and gives room to learn the game. It's also essential to repair your equipment and recycle unusable or weaker gear in the disassembler. That being said, there are many other systems worth investing in. If you're curious, I highly encourage experimentation and research. There's a legitimate overwhelming amount of systems that aren't explained well, or sometimes at all. It's okay to feel a little lost. It's up to you to ignore them or interact with them. Some currencies can provide unique resources that will assist the journey. Some systems are mostly optional but can be engaging and fun, like the dungeon crawler in the game. It's paramount to focus on enjoyment versus efficiency. Being optimal and the best is always second to having fun. Learn as you go, and never be afraid to ask for help. But what I've found curates a player's enjoyment the most is their chosen class. Every class and specialty is viable. What matters is what speaks to you. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend picking whatever visually speaks to you. So go ahead, open the whole roster, and the first thing that captures your eye, that'll usually be what grips your heart. I like to believe that we don't just convince ourselves that we'll love a character solely on looks and adapt our love based on that one facet. I want to think that visual design is complementary to gameplay. Look and feel is vital in character design, and I'd argue that remains true. The roster includes 16 main classes and over 60 specialties, ranging from 1 to 5 specialties under a single base class. Covering them all is a bit too grand for me. If looking at the roster didn't do it for you, I'll provide some commentary on all 16 base classes. Now note, I haven't played all of the specialties and much fewer of the classes, but anyone can try the types out during character creation. Furthermore, I reached out to AmirGm and DefinitelyNotMike on Twitch for some advice, and reviewed Aegis Rick's character series on YouTube to support my summaries. Also, some base classes are separated not by name, but by gender, so I'll be throwing them under an umbrella for time's sake. But definitely check them out. Just take care as some classes are gender exclusive. So without further ado, Slayers. Slayers are the fundamental sword-wielding class, each with their own unique themes and aesthetics. They're typically on the more accessible side to pick up, but can have quite a bit of depth due to their playstyles as well. They're certainly the most popular class, and for good reason. I'd recommend trying them out and see if any of them stick to you. Personally, I'd started with the Asura and adore him, even if I am poked at for how easy he is to play. Fighters are DFO's take on traditional fighting game characters. There are grapplers, Super Saiyans, and just punchy boys and girls. They're fun but can be challenging to control with their speed, limited range, and complexity. I definitely recommend them if you're looking for something a little more technical and engaging. And if you're looking for something a bit more typical beat 'em up or fighting game, you'll find your niche here. Gunners, despite their name, aren't your typical range class. They can get in your face and barrage you with bullets from every conceivable angle. Instead of fist and steel, they rely on their technology and use lead and laser weapons to punch their enemies into Swiss cheese. They can also call for a nuclear strike while blasting you with a laser cannon from afar, so what's not to like? Positioning and placement of skills are critical for the class, and they can be very rewarding to play with variety between their specialties. Personally, I find priests intriguing because they touch on multiple faiths and naturally feature a diversity of designs, themes, and difficulties. For example, we have the Inquisitor, whose gimmick is setting things on fire and then hitting them with a giant axe. And the Monk, who ducks and sways into battles and chooses to deliver divine punishment with his own two fists. They also feature 2 of the 3 supports in the game, the male and female Crusaders. Another solid example is the Avenger, which has a transformation mechanic where he goes demon mode. Thieves are arguably the most technically challenging classes in the game, but have a variety of playstyles. On the one hand, Rogue is super fast-paced assassin with flashy high-speed melee combos, and on the other, the Kunoichi functions more like casters. They can use their fire ninjutsu straight out of Naruto to cover the entire screen with, fire. The rewards are worth the challenge if you're looking for lots of movement, positioning, and mechanical expression. Knights are kind of a mixed bag. Classes like Chaos and Lightbringer are some of the most accessible and versatile classes, whereas the Elven Knight is often regarded to have the highest skill floor and skill ceiling in the game. They're also infamous for possessing a modestly sized bosom. Booba jokes aside, they have some excellent avatar options. If you're more of a fashion junkie in MMOs, these are your gals. Mages are your quintessential magic caster. They represent typical casters like the Elementalist, who wields the power of Elves obviously, and the Summoner, who commands an army of monsters to do their bidding. But they also feature some very robust classes, like the Blood Mage, a vampire who uses the power of blood to shred his enemies apart limb by limb. Or the Dimension Walker, who utilizes his abyssal powers to conjure up all kinds of terrifying Lovecraftian horrors. Their variety covers common mage-like styles, but also branches out into some DFO exclusive concepts. Demonic Lancers are relatively uncommon, but feature some of the most stylish classes in the game. They vary in difficulty, ranging from fairly straightforward, like the Vanguard, who can use his impact smashes to very fluidly combo skills one after another, to mechanically complex like the Skirmisher, who can leave behind mirages to continue his skill animations, allowing him to cast multiple skills in rapid succession. Agents are technically the latest base class to be introduced to the game, and as a result, are pretty polished and satisfying to play. Each of their specialties features a unique gun and sword combo. Some focus on shotguns, SMGs, or sci-fi pistols. Although relatively straightforward, they may feel slightly clunky at first, especially for the troubleshooter and specialist. However, they all become more capable with some attack speed and talismans, so be sure to give these dads a fair try. The Dark Knight is a unique character with a one-of-a-kind combo system, having access to a huge pool of skills from their 4 original male Slayer classes, and with them you can build skill chains that do increasingly more damage the further down they are within their chains. Due to this, however, he can be incredibly complicated to anyone who isn't well versed in male Slayers, and requires you to understand how to adapt and customize his skill chains to play him effectively. The class can feel both fast-paced and clunky simultaneously, and his nuanced playstyle can seem intimidating, but he is highly effective at dealing damage non-stop. The creator is also a one-of-a-kind class, with something no other class has, a control scheme requiring a mouse to click things to death. Her kit offers a lot of utility, gathering and super holding enemies on demand, creating shields of ice to protect herself and her party, and even having access to extended invulnerability frames while spinning within a flaming tornado. There's undoubtedly an oddly steep learning curve, but she can become just as oddly relaxing to play once you learn how her kit works. Now that's all over, but I hope you have an idea of what the game offers. I'd certainly love to cover them all, but we're not finished yet. To continue, we need to address the free-to-play model of DFO. I'll try to keep it short and hit all the required bits. First, the monetary systems of DFO are plenty friendly for actual free-to-play players. For reference, massive multiplayer online games can be subscription-based, one-time purchases, or operate on a free-to-play model. Free-to-play, like most free things, isn't entirely free, and many free-to-play models are pay-to-win, have subscriptions, purchasable expansions, or shops featuring pay-to-win systems or cosmetics. These are cash shops where players spend real money on in-game features with subjective values. The best free-to-play models are pay-to-pimp, as my friend says when describing Warframe. As long as visual customization options are the only features locked behind paywalls, free-to-play players can rest easy. In DFO, there are event passes for extra rewards, cash shops full of cosmetics, and stamina bars. The player can refill stamina bar with a rare potion. It can be purchased in the cash shop or found rarely in the game. The stamina bar, also called the fatigue points bar, or FP, limits how much the player can travel through dungeons and effectively play the game. It's very forgiving and can help the player avoid burnout from excessive play. However, note the stamina bar is more limiting in other regions and could be considered a predatory monetary system there and not in North America. But while in the States, we have it much better because the developers recognize the West hates this business practice. However, the existence of fatigue points actually has a workaround. Each player account can have massive amounts of characters. Most people have a main character or a few characters they treat as their mains, quote unquote. The other characters are alternates or alts, and alts exist to promote the main character, or when their main runs out of FP and the player wants to continue playing the game, they can use them instead. So what's the purpose of alts? Well, besides skipping the FP wait to play the game, you can funnel all post-level 100 characters materials onto your main characters. Plus, it's well worth playing multiple characters to see everything the game has to offer due to class diversity. I'll offer some last-minute advice before I begin my closing thoughts. First, don't do a speed leveling event on your primary character. These events usually accelerate an alternate for older players, typically when a new class or specialty drops. They can be helpful to get to max level quickly as possible, but do nothing to teach a player anything about the game. Second, join a guild. Find some friendly and active schmucks and hammer away your questions in the guild chat. DFO is lovely, and because it does a poor job of explaining itself, most veteran players are more than willing to offer a hand. We've all been there, and we're eager to help out. Third, don't use clear quest function past level 80. If you're over leveled, you can clear quests. This means you can use clear quest in the quest log to skip that quest if you're over the level cap for that quest. You'll miss out on the story, which is a personal decision, but if you are past level 80, and you clear quest, you may get stuck farming items that those quests would have given you rewards for those items. It's annoying and not worth the hassle, so if you use clear quest, just keep that in mind post level 80. Last but not least, I'm not an expert on DFO, I only covered what I could. If you need more help, I could throw you to the wolves and hand you off to the infamous quote-unquote Google it, but DFO has lovely creators that are more than helpful, and I'm living proof of that. Check out these creators if you want to know more or need more help. Aegis on YouTube has plenty of videos to help you out. Some are patch specific, but can still give you an idea of the characters and content and be helpful. He makes excellent guides. AmirGm streams and is kind enough to answer questions both in her streams and on her Discord. She's entertaining and knowledgeable and has played the game for far too long. She does raid streams consistently that are super entertaining, and thank you again for all the help with the video. I'm going to mispronounce this. Medrathis is active on Twitch and YouTube and provides guides, educational streams, and entertaining content. He's an edgy blood mage, and despite being relatively new to the game, he's very knowledgeable about the game and very helpful. Plus, his PvP streams slap. And finally, and arguably most helpful, is the infamous DFO help desk himself. Definitely Maybe Not Mike on Twitch helped tremendously with this video and is a fantastic soul. He provides advice and raids on Twitch. Definitely check him out. In all honesty, these creators were vital to the video and my general experience with DFO. They not only made this project possible, but made DFO comprehensible and therefore that much more fun. Having a tight community makes the game so much more savourable, and I hope y'all check them out as well. I don't know much, there is a lot to do post-game. As promised, I haven't indulged in it yet, so I may best cover leveling instead. Now, all of the footage I'm going to be using for Endgame is going to be from the streams of the people I mentioned above. Again, please check them out if you want to. Boss rushes, gauntlets, raids, fashion, PvP, and of course gearing to get strong enough to do all of the content above is the bulk of post-game, from what I can tell. The content is drastically more formidable than leveling and way more fulfilling. Many of it is group content or is best enjoyed that way and requires multiple attempts to succeed. But I'm already out of lane. Whether being the best at PvP or PvE or even the most fashionable, I know there's content worth playing at the end. I just don't know enough to critique it. I know that I can't wait to start enjoying it though. And on to my final thoughts. DFO was genuinely something else. The experience was novel alone with its genre, but it also had outstanding and innovative classes like I've never seen. It had the complexity of a fighting game, but was still a beat 'em up at heart. Dungeon Fighter Online was gripping and worthy of my investment. There was always more room to grow mechanically and statistically. Its retro but polished sprite work carried it, and the variety of settings nailed its art style well above competitors. There's nothing as good looking in the same vein as DFO that isn't DFO. While this MMORPG beat 'em up isn't popular here in the States, it's evident that it should be. It deserves so much more, and I pray it gets all the attention it desperately needs. I hope you enjoyed my review, and I can't wait to see you next time I cover an MMO's leveling, or perhaps when I cover DFO's Endgame. Regardless, I enjoyed my experience immensely, and hope you all do too. Stay safe out there, and remember to have fun.